and I'm not a doctor. So that's very important because yeah, you have to do certain things to be a doctor. Although I did study in a PhD program, and I do work for the National Research Council of Canada. And why is my video not on? Failed to start video camera. Oh, it's in use by another application. I see. All right. Okay, let's close the other application.
Yeah, I'd like to request everyone to just switch on your camera for 1 second, so Stephen can see all of you. Go ahead, sir. Just for 1 second, no? So it's nice for a presenter to
Yeah.
see some faces. That we have so many people joining from all over. We really
Yeah,
welcome
that's
all of you.
cool.
Yeah, we welcome all of you. Like, we are real people. In artificial intelligence, we are not artificial. We are real people, right? Thank you. Thank you for doing, for accepting my
Yeah.
request. Go ahead, please.
Okay, so I think what I'll do is I'll share my screen. There's lots of interesting stuff on the screen to be shared. Um, so let's just pop that up for me here, get it in the right spot. Okay. Brought by an individual. Okay. Start from beginning, sharing screen. There we go. Oh no, I want to use that whole screen. Okay, there we go. So, you should be seeing my nice, beautiful panda. An AI generated panda, but we'll talk about that in a bit. And
Recording in progress.
we have a recording in progress, which is great. So, whoops, I don't want you to have to see that. Okay, I'll just minimize that. There we go. So this is an introductory session. So I'm not going to go deep into the woods or the weeds. I'm also going to make sure there's time for people to ask questions and all of that. I'm going to show you some things. I'm going to do some things. And we're going to have fun for an hour playing with AI. So, introduction to AI. What do we got? Go forward. There we go. So, AI today is used for everything. Oh, geez, I'm gesturing madly. um, it's used for everything. There are basically six major applications of AI, application areas of AI, I guess I should say. And they include things like description. This is, using AI to capture a description of what might be a very complex environment. Diagnostic, to explain why something happened. Predictive, so you use AI, for example, in airplane parts to predict when the part is going to fail before it fails. Prescriptive, where the AI makes a suggestion to you about what you should do. Should you hire a person? Should you fire a person? Generative, which is what everyone's talking about these days. Making pictures like the beautiful panda on this page. And then a category I've added in my own work, deontic, where the AI looks at everything we've said about ethics and decides what is the right thing to happen. There's a link here on the slides, and these slides will be shared after the session on all the possible applications of AI. I've spent a number of years just every time I found something that used AI, I put it in the list. And I captured a very large list of all the applications of AI. Should be seeing them here. So there's the descriptive, diagnostic, and so on. And there is a mechanism if you see something else here, you can add to that list. One very common application of AI that people don't talk about anymore, although they probably should, is automated or automatic translation. And this is everywhere now. Simple little example. Let's look at my website here. Now I'm using an application called Firefox, and I can translate my content here in Firefox. So, I've lost. I did it just a second ago. There we go. Translate page. So here now, this is the page that I just showed you. I can pick one of a number of different languages. Let's go to Bulgarian and translate. And here's my page in Bulgarian. Now I don't speak Bulgarian, so I can't speak to how good a translation that is. But maybe go to French. The French translation is pretty good. Now, there's a weakness here, and you've probably spotted it already. The list of languages right now is pretty short. And it doesn't include indigenous languages like Cree or Inuktitut. And it doesn't include a lot of different national groups, and of course the Asian languages aren't here. But many other translation services have a much wider range of languages, and it's only a matter of time before we see it in something like Firefox. Another thing AI does is face recognition. You've probably seen this. I mean, I use this. Here's my phone. Well, you can't see it because I don't have video, but I use thumbprints. I just put my thumbprint on the phone and it opens right up for me. No problem. I have a laptop in the other room. I open the lid on my laptop. The camera looks at me, says, "Oh yeah, that's him," and just pops in. I don't have to log in or register at all. Now, there's all kinds of ways of using facial recognition, some good, some bad. Recently, there was a case where a person was blocked from going in to see an event at Madison Square Garden because the company that she was associated with was in a lawsuit with Madison Square Garden. Actually, she was a lawyer for the company representing the company that was in a lawsuit. And it recognized her, and they said, "No, you can't get in." Now, the question is that appropriate? We'll get to that. The big question is, how does this all work? Well, that's the big question for now. Because we think of artificial intelligence as a computer program, and it is a computer program. But we think of a computer program as a series of instructions. Do this, then do this, then do this. But artificial intelligence is very different. It is not a series of instructions. We aren't telling the computer do this, then do this, then do this. It is a form of data processing. So what do I mean by that? Let's have a look. Here's what's happening in a simple image recognition program. The input is on the left, and you can see it's all kinds of different shapes. It's sort of dithered. It'd be hard even for us to tell what the number is. But it's run through a whole bunch of these processors, and out the other end, the AI detects what number it is. So, how does that work? Well, if you think about the input as we would with the eye, so we have layers of processors. These processors are all connected together. So the output for one processor turns into the input for another one. So on the left-hand side, we have all the vision, the image of the thing. And then on the right-hand side, we have the output. So these are organized into layers, and each individual processor we call a neuron, or maybe a unit. And then the lines which send the signal from one processor to another, that's called an edge, or sometimes it's called a connection. So here's kind of what happens. So here's the input. It's a matrix, in this case of 576 dots. And each of these dots has a different value. So in this case, the values are the different shades of gray. And you see they sort of create values between 1 and 0. That's the standard that they use. It doesn't really matter, but that's what they use. So we take this array and actually line it up as a whole sequence of values, and that becomes our first layer in the processing that I just showed you. And so then we have the input data that comes in from the layer and is going to feed into the next layer and feed into the next layer, and finally the output. There's only 2 layers here. This is a relatively simple network. Now the values move from layer to layer. They as we say, feed forward, and then they produce a result, in this case D. Well, we can train these things by feeding back. That's feed forward, feed back. So if it wasn't really a D, we can send a signal that propagates back through all those layers and corrects all of those connections. And so the corrected values of all of those connections is what we call a data model. And this is what it looks like mathematically. You don't need to know this. But what's really interesting here is that this mathematical formula is one of many that describes all the different ways that we can change the configuration of these individual data processors and the connections between them to make it easier or harder to train or adjust this network of connections. And that, in a nutshell, is AI. If you understood everything that I've said so far, you have an understanding of how AI works. And see if I can see the chat. Yeah, here we go. So if you have any comments, do feel free just to type them in the chat. Like, for example, if you haven't understood what I've said so far, I'll see them. I'm just going to move this off the screen, but I'll see them and I'll respond to them as you enter them in the chat. And I'm sure Manisha will interrupt me if she sees a hand up or someone wants to comment. Okay. So it's all pretty complicated, but in a sense, it's all pretty intuitive as well. Here's an early type of AI that performs a different function. It's called clustering. And what this AI does is it organizes groups of things, whatever they are, into clusters. And the way it works is it picks 3 random points, represented by the X, and then colors all of the individual things according to the nearest point. And then it moves those points so that it's at an average place where all those colored points are. And then it repeats it, and it repeats it, and it repeats it, and eventually it forms a stable pattern that clusters whatever it's looking at into a certain number of groups. K groups. K number of groups. So this is called K-means clustering. There's also a thing called K-nearest neighbor clustering, which is a similar sort of thing. But this is how we use AI. It's a very similar process to what we just saw with recognition, but how we use AI to organize and sort things. And this is an important thing to keep in mind. One of the applications is automated grading of papers. You may have seen reference to that. Well, automated grading of papers is a clustering exercise. And what we're doing is we're taking all of the students' papers and we're organizing them into, say, 5 groups. A, B, C, D, E, F. A, B, C, D, E, F. 6 groups. Well, I guess there's no E, is there? So A, B, C, D, F. 5 groups. So we use an application. First we train it by, having it make predictions, and then we feed back our corrections in the form of actual grades that actual instructors have given papers. And then this model that we've trained is applied on new papers. And it sorts those new papers into the clusters. It just looks at the paper just like it would look at an image, or just like it would look at some text to be translated. It looks at it and says, what category does this belong to? A, B, C, D, or E. And it's basically based on the similarity, the overall similarity of the paper to other papers that are A, B, C, D, or F. It's important to keep in mind, because we're so focused on things like rubrics or rules. It's not looking at actual details that are in the paper. It's not even looking at the content of the paper. It doesn't care about the content of the paper. The content becomes relevant only when it's similar to other papers that got an A. So there can still be errors in a paper and it can still get an A. There can still be some really glaring errors in a paper and it can still get an A. But that could be true of a real student paper too. So it's just putting it into a category. It's based not on a small number of factors like did it say this, did it say that, does it have these 3 distinctions, whatever we might use. But it's based on tens of thousands of factors, hundreds of thousands of factors. Factors that go beyond what an average human instructor might consider. But if you think about it, it's kind of like what an instructor does anyways. At least an instructor that isn't grading strictly according to a rubric. Sometimes they do, but sometimes, most of the time, certainly when I was an instructor, I didn't. I'd look for some things, sure. If I was writing about, if I was asking people to write about the Battle of Hastings, I would expect them to say it happened in 1066. But if I'm reading a 5-page essay on the Battle of Hastings, I'm going to be looking for a lot more than that. I'm going to be considering a wide variety of factors, some of which I could list out, but not all of them. And really what would happen is, as an evaluator, an experienced evaluator of student papers, I would simply recognize, oh yeah, that's an A paper. And I could explain why after, maybe. But when I'm grading it, usually what I do is I read the paper and I say, okay, that's an A, that's a B. I might make comments on the paper, but really it's a process of recognizing. I can see, having already graded tens of thousands of papers, I can see that this is an A. And it's going to stack up with all the other A's that I've ever seen. And that's kind of how automated grading works. You might think, really? Do we really sort of think the same way? Well, let's look at something I call the projection game. And think about this. The projection game is really simple. All I want you to do is think about and even say or put in the chat what word comes next. So try this out. Bacon and what comes next? Anyone? Okay. David said eggs. Erica said eggs. Merle said eggs. Eggs. Yeah. Pretty much everyone said eggs. Right? Nobody says bacon and pork chops. Yeah. Nobody says bacon and clouds. Right? We just recognize that the word that goes there is eggs. How about Wayne? Give it a try again. Now it's more interesting. Wayne Campbell, who I've never heard of. Wayne Cox. Wayne Enterprise. Oh, okay, for Batman. Okay. Wayne Manor. Oh, I see. Wayne Manor from Batman. Maybe I'm dating myself. I put Wayne Gretzky. How about American? What would you put after that? American Made. Interesting. That's fascinating. American Dad, American Cheese, American Idol, American Pie, American... You notice how everybody's putting something slightly different in? Isn't that interesting? Although you all have answers, American Graffiti, and all of those answers make sense to everyone else. It's just you picked the one that you picked. What did I pick? American Idol. Again, dating myself. How about Justin? Timberlake. Yeah, I thought there might be some Timberlakes. Oh, just in time. Yeah, funny. Trudeau. Yeah, I put Trudeau. I live in Ottawa. What can I say? One more. Tried and true. Tried and died. Funny. Tried and tested. Interesting. Yeah, I put tried and true. So think about what's happening here, right? All the language that you've used in the past, all the language you've heard, that you've seen, lets you recognize a familiar pattern, and that familiar pattern helps you figure out what comes next. This is exactly what an AI is doing, for example, a large language model is doing. Exactly this. So, you've heard of ChatGPT, which we'll look at in a sec. It's called a large language model because it uses billions of bits of data, billions of examples, trillions of connections, about 3 trillion connections actually, or edges, as we just saw, to make these predictions. And so it can do more than just bacon and eggs for Wayne Gretzky. It can do more complicated projections, but it's doing the same thing you did and arguably in a very similar way. It's not looking at the content, it's just looking at what everybody else did when they said bacon and or Wayne or whatever. So here's the prompt that we put into ChatGPT, but you see here we can make it really big, and I'll play that again. Word 1 to word 2, or this whole paragraph, and then out comes a sentence. The same kind of thing, right? It's just bigger, and it's bigger because it has tons of data to work with. This is kind of what it looks like. ChatGPT looks at how we used all of these words. It looks at the context that these words happen in, all the different ways we've used these words in the past, or these phrases or these sentences, and then it comes up with a projection. But again, all it's doing, right, it's based on this model, which is this trained set of connections between input layers and output layers. And then using that model, you give it some data, it pops out an output. It's not popping the output because we tell it this is the best response or anything like that. It's popping the output because it's learned from all of these different examples. Very similar to the way you learn from all of your experience of language. Now, there's some caveats, some things to think about here. It does not have access to all of the knowledge and experiences that you do. It's never been out in the real world. It's never been in a forest. It's never burned its hand on a stove, like me. Its conversations have been limited. It can't access dictionaries or Wikipedia or anything at all after 2021. So it's limited in its understanding of what really should come next. So here's ChatGPT. I should probably, let's look at these limitations. So some examples of prompts that you can give it. Some of the capabilities. ChatGPT can remember what the user said previously in the conversation, keeps track of that. So you can follow up and correct it. And it's trained, specially trained, to decline inappropriate requests. So it's a separate functionality that they've added to the front of it. The limitations, well, because it doesn't have any experience in the real world and it doesn't have access to actual facts, it may generate incorrect information. As well, because there's bias and prejudice in the data that goes into the system, it may produce harmful instructions or bias in the output. And as I said earlier, it really doesn't know anything about the world after 2021. And from what I understand, some things have happened since then. So let's look at ChatGPT. So pretty straightforward. We'll just log in. You have to create an account. I just created one with Google. So there we go. And now I'm into ChatGPT. And I can send it a message. What should I send it? What is a panda? ChatGPT is verbose. So it's going to tell me about what a panda is, and it'll list some factors. It's interesting. You look at this: appearance, habitat, diet, behavior, conservation status, reproduction. It figured it should give me this list because I asked it what is such and such an animal, and this is the sort of things that people would use, the sort of things they would say when they asked what is a panda. But let's have a little fun. What is a panda?
Uh, Stephen, is
Yes.
it only in English language? It
Mostly,
gave out the results in English language because your question was in the English language?
yeah. So let's see if it'll give me the response in French. It's thinking. This one's a bit harder for it, right? Here we go. So here we go. What is a panda? State the response in French. All right. Let's give it a better challenge.
In Cree.
That's exactly what I was going to put in. This is interesting. It says, a panda is not a concept commonly found in Cree culture, as pandas are native to China and not part of the traditional Cree environment. And now it's going to tell me that Cree is an Algonquin language spoken by indigenous peoples primarily in Canada. So, as you can see, the results are not nearly as good when we ask for the response in Cree. And that points to one of the deficiencies of something like ChatGPT. The vast bulk of its training comes from English, with lesser training, less data coming from French, and much less input data coming from Cree. So when you asked for it to come put the output in Cree, it doesn't know what to do. It doesn't know how to respond. It responds inappropriately. And it's obviously much less than satisfying. I asked for it in limerick form. It gave me a limerick. So let's see if it follows the meter properly. In China's bamboo black and white, the panda's a wonderful sight. With patches of noir, they sit and dine, a symbol of nature's delight. Yeah, that's the right meter. That's not bad. So ChatGPT is better at limericks than at Cree. That's definitely worth taking note of, right? And it points to some of the risks involved in using ChatGPT. Some good advice when using ChatGPT, giving it some prompts. You can talk to it as though it were a person and correct it. Let's come back to our example here. Is Cree an Algonquin language? Oops, helps if I spell Algonquin correctly. So it's saying, yes, Cree is an Algonquin language, and then it explains it a bit. What are other Algonquin languages? So here we go. We're going to get a nice list. So now this is the challenge too. Suppose I'm a student and I'm writing an essay about Cree, and I decide to cheat and use ChatGPT to write my answer for me. Well, I don't actually know what languages are Algonquin languages and what languages aren't. This is just something I don't know. So suppose I take this text and put it into my essay. I'm taking a huge risk here, aren't I? Because I don't know whether the statements here are true. Is Naskapi and Innu really spoken by the Innu people in Eastern Canada? Well, if I don't know that myself and I put that into an essay, I'm putting something into an essay that I don't know personally whether or not it's true, and it could very easily not be true. And so I'm making a significant mistake. Imagine if I used ChatGPT to make policy as a government. Well, now I'd be making my mistake and putting it right into policy. That could be dangerous. We have a question in the chat. Would text taken from ChatGPT show up as plagiarism in a program such as Turnitin? And the answer is sometimes. All of these plagiarism systems over the last few months, over the last 6 months or so, have connected the plagiarism detector to an AI detector of one sort or another. So each one of them tries to detect whether or not the student essay was created by an AI. And there have been studies done on this. I've covered them in my newsletter, and if needed, I can give examples. And it turns out that these AI detection systems are not accurate. They're not reliable. There's a lot of false positives. And it turns out, especially for people who are not fluent in English, for people whose first language is not English, these plagiarism detectors are much more likely to say this was created by an AI than people who are fluent in English. You can sort of see why, right? They see stilted English or grammatical mistakes and they jump to the conclusion that it must be an AI. So you can't depend on Turnitin or any other plagiarism program to detect whether or not somebody has used ChatGPT or any other AI. Usually people discover it was an AI because it makes an obvious factual error. But yeah, sometimes students make obvious factual errors too. Coming back. You can do other things with ChatGPT. You can have it pretend that it's a dentist or a historian or a hockey player. As we've seen already, we can do multiple attempts. Sometimes ChatGPT will go off topic, and you have to correct it and say, get back on topic. As we've seen, you can specify the output format. You can also put explicit constraints on the response. List the top 5 languages. List the top 30 languages. Use 4 words in your response. Use 6 words in your response, etc. You can also generate images using these AI systems. This is a fun one called Deep AI. So the prompt I used was create an image of a panda in a forest in pen and ink. So you see what I'm doing here, right? This is what I want, and now I'm putting a constraint on it. I want it in pen and ink. So I'll click generate. We can see it's generating here. It's going to take a little bit to generate. And there we go. There's a panda. I guess it's in a forest. I do like that one actually, but let's pretend I don't like it. I'll do it again. And so we're running the model all over again. We get a different result. So people say, well, these AI systems, they just copy images that are already there on the internet. Well, let's test that. We can test that really easily. We'll save the image. So I'm just going to save it to my website. I have an image directory here. It's just called output.jpg. And now let's go to Google image search. Right, so image search. And now if I click on this little camera here, I can upload a file, and I'll upload the image that I just created. There it is. So there's the image. And I'll just select the entire image. And you see how it says find image source. It says no results found for the selected area. In other words, no results found for the image. This is pretty consistent. It's not able to find the image that the AI just generated. Well, you might say, well, yeah, it's the same system that generated it. Yeah. Or the image might be from a proprietary image library. But the most practical answer is to say it's a new, completely novel image. And that's what it is. This image isn't copied. The look and form are copied. But you can make it less and less copied by specifying more specifically the output format. So it's an original image. It's similar to other images on the internet, but it's not a copy. Got a question from Merle. So what would be a practical way of using ChatGPT in, say, schoolwork or writing articles and so on? Is it even recommended? And that's a pretty interesting question. There isn't an agreed upon answer yet. Some people say, well, you probably shouldn't be assigning questions that can be answered by ChatGPT. So don't ask them for, the typical 5-paragraph essay, because ChatGPT is probably better than your students at producing 5-paragraph essays, even your A students. Similarly, short answer quizzes or things like that they can just use ChatGPT to answer, probably shouldn't be asking them anymore. Just as, students have calculators today, or at least calculators on their phones. And so we wouldn't ask them what is 2 plus 2, what is the square root of 1,403,000, etc. We just wouldn't ask them that anymore because they don't need to calculate it anymore. Other people have suggested, well, just make sure that they can't use computers when they're writing their essay. That's pretty hard to do, seeing as people use computers all the time, in word processing, for example. And, if I open up my word processor, like Microsoft Word, see if I can find a file that's, I'll just create a new one. That's what I'll do. So here's Microsoft Word, right? Well, already It's giving me a bunch of templates, right? So create that. So here's my recipe. Isn't that beautiful? This is all done for me by Word. So, and I could probably, well, I can actually dictate to it. So it'll translate my audio voice to text. I can put text in using artificial intelligence. All the tools I need are right in Word, because Word is owned by Microsoft, and Microsoft has a major interest in OpenAI, which created ChatGPT. So that's hard to do. You might say, well, you have to use pen and pencil, but nobody uses pen and pencil anymore for anything. We got a long comment here, and I'll put it on the screen so people can see it. Stephen will probably have a more robust answer. Well, thank you. But previous panels and chats I've attended for AI in education discuss that many folks don't think it is a reliable resource for retrieving information. That's true. It's not what it's designed to do. Remember, we just looked at what it does. However, they have entered the information they gather and requested assistance in creating a writing framework for it to help organize their thoughts. Right. The writers then noted that the exact ways they utilized generative AI in their final results. In other words, they were very clear. Here's what was contributed to my answer by ChatGPT. My particular institution, he continues, encourages open conversations with our professors to help guide how we might utilize generative AI in our work. So it's better for structure than for actual information input. Yeah, it's really good with structure. It's really good at formatting, whether it's the structure of the text or whether it's the design of a page or things like that. Really good at that. And that's where the answers that I'm seeing are kind of trending toward, where you create much more open-ended assignments where the person would probably use AI and they'd go back and forth with it. They'd use it to structure their response. They'd use it to suggest possibilities. We understand that this will probably happen. It will happen. But the idea is that the student works with the AI in order to come up with a response. And they are clear about not just, they produce not just the final response, but are clear about or open about the process that they used to get that response. And so what they're being evaluated on isn't what they produced, but how they went about producing what they produced. And that's, you think about it, that's a far more interesting kind of evaluation anyways, right? And then it doesn't matter what tools they use. Doesn't matter who they spoke to, who they collaborated with, what they looked up. Because the result, the output, isn't what's being evaluated. The process is what's being evaluated. The process is what really matters here. Sorry about that. The answer, basically, when people ask how accurate is AI, how accurate is ChatGPT, it really depends on what you're doing. And in general, if it's just doing a creative act, like removing speckles from photos, which is, I use a product called Topaz, because I do a lot of photography. And oops. So there's one of my photographs. And when I originally took it, I took it in low light, very high resolution, and the image that the camera captures has little speckles in it. It's called pixelation. So I used Topaz AI to normalize the image, to remove the little speckles so that all the colors are nice and smooth. AI is really good at that. To me, it doesn't matter whether a particular pixel was a particular shade of yellow. I'm trying to get a nice image, right? And so for me, the AI is perfectly good. For many,
There's a comment. There's a
Oh.
comment in chat. To what degree can we expect output to be identical when given the same parameters?
That's an excellent question. I'm just looking for my chat window, which I've now lost. Come back to me. Oh, right, here we go. There it is. Excellent question. Oh, thanks, Christine. It depends on, identical. It depends on the AI, but every time you put in your prompt, it's generating the image again, or it's generating the text again. And it's very likely to produce something different. The more complex a thing you ask it to produce, the more likely it will produce something different. Because it generates it again. And there's, a lot of this stuff is based on randomness and probability. Depending on the exact kind of algorithm. You saw all those numbers that I showed earlier. Depending on how you set up all those numbers, it'll be more or less random in some ways. If you ask it something very specific, it's much more likely that it'll generate an identical response. If I asked ChatGPT, what is the capital of France, twice in a row, it'll say Paris twice in a row. And that's another factor, right? The overwhelming number of speakers in its database will say that Paris is the capital of France. So the likelihood is very small that we'll get a different answer. But if we ask it, what is the best capital in the world, we're probably going to get different responses. But eventually it'll begin to repeat responses because there's only so many capitals in the world. Oh, and we're almost done, as I can see. So we've got Celeste has given us 3 takeaways from the meeting. Give presentation. Oh, see full summary. Oh, and she's created an Otter summary. Isn't that cool? Otter is an AI program, and it produces a summary. And so it's generated a transcript, and it's going to actually get automatic meeting notes. I think that's pretty cool, personally. How accurate is it? It's going to depend on the meeting. And that's just it. Different AI programs do different things. Some AI programs, I think like that image one that I just used, keep a library of the images that they created for a certain prompt. And if you use the same prompt over and over again, it'll eventually come back and give you the same image it created before, because it just keeps them in its database. So that's the sort of thing that programmers can do. AI can and will make things up. That's really important. People say AI is not creative, but it is creative. It makes mistakes all the time. It's not the best creativity in the world. But if you specifically ask for something, like say a reference, it'll create one. It might be a fake one, but it'll give you its best effort. And there's plenty of evidence for that. And these are called AI hallucinations. They're not really hallucinations, but if you give it all the data in the world and ask it to imagine something, it will imagine it, just like you. So, there's ethics of AI, different approaches. For teachers and educators, these are probably three of the most important points. First of all, protect student privacy. Don't capture student information and then use it in an AI system, because the AI system will take that data and use it to train other stuff. So it's important to understand how student data is collected and stored. As we saw with the Cree example, AI will sometimes treat different languages differently. It'll treat different people from different ethnicities differently. And you got to watch out for that. It will think that white, male, American sounding voices are normal. And of course, that would be a bias, and that could harm students and people using AI. So we have to watch out for that. And then, of course, digital citizenship. We talked about how to give students examples or assignments, and we want to teach people to use AI ethically, themselves, thinking about bias and privacy concerns, so that they don't just propagate the sorts of mistakes that AI can make. Government of Canada, of which I'm a part, but I'm just mentioning these without necessarily endorsing them, although I think they're reasonably good. If you want to use AI ethically, you need to understand and measure what AI is doing, right? Don't just take its results for granted. Look at the results. Ask yourself, is that an accurate result? If you can, measure it against something you know to be accurate. If you're using AI, be transparent about it. And that applies to everyone. So I used AI here in this presentation to generate all the panda images, because I can't draw that well, but I love the images. The rest of this presentation was created by me as a human. But just like you see, there's little links at the bottom of every one of my pages, right? I showed you where I got the information or the image or whatever that I put in the slide presentation. The same is the case for AI. If you use AI, make your source clear. If you can, and this is a challenge, provide an explanation for why the AI made the decision it did. But more importantly, I think, be as open as possible. And then finally, provide sufficient training for people. Give them actual experience and actual guidance in using AI. And this kind of a talk is a first step, but it certainly should not be the last step. So that's everything I have, and that's pretty much 12 o'clock, which is the end of our session. And I do hope you found it interesting and useful. I'll hang around in case you have questions on the chat, and but
Recording stopped.
we can probably stop the recording. And thank you very much for taking the time to come and join me.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for your presentation. I think it gave us a good overview, and thank you to Christine, or was it Celeste, for running Otter.
Yeah, that was pretty cool.
Too.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was really good to see.
Celeste.
Anne-Marie saying, thank you so much. It was so interesting. Bill is saying, thank you. This was informative. Erica is saying, thank you for sharing your expertise. Audrey is saying again, thank you, Chris. Thank you so much. So it's been a good presentation. So what are the next steps now? With any new tech tool which comes, or depending on what
Yeah.
is the stage of development, what next? What next with AI? You know.
Yeah. What I always tell people when they're asking what next with any piece of technology is play. Play is the way to learn about this, right? So, in my slide presentation, I gave you links to the Chat GPT and to the image generating website. Go to those sites and play. Try some things out. See what the results are. Get comfortable with it. And after you've played for a while, you can do some searches on Google with questions that may have come up. You know, like, for example, what kind of formats can Chat GPT produce? I produced the limerick, you know, for example, or for problems you encountered, right? For example, how to use AI to translate into Cree. ChatGPT did a terrible job at it. But maybe there's another AI out there that does a better job at it. So, you know, you sort of begin to do some research based on the questions that you've actually run into. And that research will take you to more things you can play with, other applications. So, you know, circle back, play some more, and that'll produce more questions. And that cycle gradually builds a familiarity with the technology. Notice you're not actually using it for anything serious yet, but you're just developing a familiarity with it. You're building experience. You're building your own experience database in your mind. And then as you're doing your day-to-day work, you will begin to see or recognize as places where some application that you used might be useful. And if you see those, try it out. But don't do it for anything serious or permanent, right? Just try it out. See what the results are, right? Evaluate the results. Play with it a bit more, see if you can get better results. And once you're really comfortable with the results, then you can try using it in your actual work application, like say a classroom or something like that. That's what I did here, right? I played with ChatGPT and I played with the Panda producing thing, ran a few queries through it, tested the results, was happy with what I got, was reasonably confident that I could use those results in this presentation without offending anybody too much. Ran those, and now I'm getting feedback from you. I got great feedback in the form of the chat comments, and that adds to my understanding. And you just iterate on that. Try something out, evaluate for the result. When you're more comfortable with it, try it in a real world situation, but always evaluate the result. And that's basically the approach, I would say.
Thank you. Kaylin has a question. You mentioned that AI was buried from new information past 2021.
Yeah.
This is the first I've heard of this. So can you explain some more?
Okay. Now, this statement applies specifically to ChatGPT. Other AI will have other limitations, right? So, the reason for this, remember, we used data to train our network, to form all of those individual connections, the mathematics of those connections, to build a model. So the data that they used to train ChatGPT was data that existed in their databases in 2021. So that's why ChatGPT doesn't know anything after 2021. Anything that was created after 2021 was not used to train ChatGPT. Now, in the future, they might use new data as well. And in that case, ChatGPT will be up to date according to whatever that new cutoff is. But that's the reason, right? It's where the data came from that was used to train ChatGPT. What it's important to understand generally is that all AI will be limited by the data that's used to train it. It's limited in the sources that are used. It's limited in how representative that data is, whether it's all English or whether it's multiple languages. It's limited in the dates that data came from, who produced the data, how accurate that data is. Imagine if I trained ChatGPT only using information produced by, say, Fox News, or only information that was produced in China for a given period of time. The results would be very different than what we're getting today.
Thank you. Would somebody else like to share their experience about using AI? I'll share mine. um, I used Chat GPT for, um, um, I wanted to see if my students can use Chat GPT. So I tested and
Mm-hmm.
put various different prompts about like how would you cite a book written by one author? How would you cite a video from YouTube in APA 7th edition? And consistently, as it was mentioned in the chat to structure, it always gave me a template, like,
Mm-hmm.
and then it gave me an example. That was my first experimenting with Chat GPT. It always gave me the structure, like, last name of author, year, and the format in APA 7th edition, like a template. Then I tested second one, which was not so accurate, was um, this is the citation I have done. Is this correct? Um, so I realized when I'm using Chat GPT to test or evaluate my handwritten citation, the more metadata I provided, the better result I got, the
Mm-hmm.
more accurate result I got. Um, this was my. I didn't think of it that time as using ChatGPT to get structure, but that's what it is. What it was doing the first time, it was always giving me the template and then an example, a generic example. So, how else has somebody else played with ChatGPT or other AI for academic purposes or for helping our students, or even in part of your work anywhere, not just in the GLAM sector?
You can see what
Should
I
I
did.
say?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I made pandas.
Yeah. Yeah, your pandas came out as pandas. Pandas did not come out as elephants.
Yeah, they weren't the best pandas always, but they were pandas.
I think I'm going to request you to do a part two, and you can take your time, and we can do it middle of November if that's okay with you. This playing sort of idea which you have, maybe with just images, you know, like the one you showed, or
Mm-hmm.
something else.
Yeah,
Just think about it.
yeah. Well, think about it. It should be, if we do a part two, it should follow on, right? I don't want to just repeat what we did in part one, so it should be something maybe a little more specific. But if people have ideas that they would like to have us talk about, certainly, like the suggestions that you made prior to this session that Manisha forwarded to me were really useful in helping me shape this presentation. So
Yeah.
something like that again would be very helpful.
I also used Chat GPT to learn Cree. So I
Oh, wow.
realized, like, teach me Cree is what I said, and
Mm-hmm.
I was quite impressed that 90% of what came out was correct.
Hmm.
Only like minor errors because I do know a little bit of Cree. But what I noticed that the maybe I did not specify the format because, like you, or um, the output format should be there in the prompt,
Yeah.
because um, what came out was in standard Roman orthography, and I am learning Cree from Cree syllabics.
Uh-huh.
Um, so standard Roman orthography looks like the English language.
Yeah.
So if I'm trying to learn it with what looks like the English language, my pronunciation will be like I pronounce it in the English language, because it is natural. I will read it the way I read in the English language. But that's not the case. The sounds are different, and um, I think syllabics first approach works better if you want to learn the sound of the language or the pronunciation of the language. ChatGPT was good enough in giving me out content in standard Roman orthography, but that time I did not know how
Yeah.
to phrase my prompt. I'm realizing the prompt, the question you ask in anything, but in machine language is more, the how you frame your question is equally important. And like giving it, so for example, when I was testing for how do I cite a dissertation in APA 7th edition, written by Dr. Claudine Lewis, and it gave a wrong dissertation. It was about environment stuff. Then I did it again and I put in the right metadata and I put in the digital object identifier from a repository. And then Chat GPT gave me an accurate, um,
Yeah.
the full text reference about that specific dissertation. So then I learned that the more metadata we provide about a specific source, um, the better. I've also read a study that in Harvard, they found that some students cheated plagiarism where Chat GPT created citations which did not exist.
Yeah.
But I want people to play with it. And, um, in my education, I did not use Chat GPT because I was scared about plagiarism. But I think why have this negative mindset with a tool which can be of use to mankind, for public good. Like I think some academic institutions, that's why I'm saying some, they already have in their mind that plagiarism systems in place, but it's a tool to play, as you mentioned.
Yeah.
I find that it's giving me some data, but how effectively, like with any technology tools, you need to use it in the right manner, that in an appropriate way. And I think how you draft your prompt is like the metadata I put in, is it's better than using a citation generator. I found
Yeah.
it's more faster. Like I was comparing, with different citation generators, the output I was getting and what I was getting with the Chat GPT. Like what's more accurate.
There's a lot of material on the internet now about how to create good prompts for ChatGPT, and these guides were produced by people doing exactly that, by playing with ChatGPT and learning for themselves what works really well and what doesn't work really well. But if you want to look it up for yourself, on Google, use the phrase prompt engineering. I'll type it in the chat. It's not really the greatest phrase in the world, but that's the term that people are using to talk about how to create good prompts for AI in general and ChatGPT in particular.
Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, because this is equally important. Um, and thank you for all the attendees. I'm really grateful that you're sharing the links in the chat too. That really helps, because there were last week when Contact Nod did a presentation about AI, I think, or somewhere else maybe, because AI seems to be a hot topic right now. So many sessions are going on about AI. Um, they were speaking about, oh, yes, I remember. It was in the global development, global affairs, global development sector, that there were not very many policies or rules and regulations. I think it depends on each sector, how fast it is
Yeah.
adopting new technology or chat GPT, and depending on that, I think maybe then the best practices or more guides are being developed. What do you
Yeah.
think?
Yeah, that's an activity that's constantly in progress. You saw the link that I put in for the Canadian government one. That's only come out in the last month, something like that. UNESCO came out with again a set of guidelines only within the last month or two. Um, uh, European guidelines again came out just within the last month or two. So gradually, these are all being developed. It's a bit tricky because it's not obvious what these guidelines should be. And even the ones that are out now, I would personally take them as a first draft because there are going to be a lot of what they call unintended consequences of using AI, especially for education, for governance, for healthcare, etc., that will not have been covered under the guidelines that have come out. You know, for example, insurance companies will use AI, and they'll use AI to determine whether somebody is a risk. But the AI will consider 50,000, 100,000 different factors about you, all the information it can find on an individual person. Some of those factors might be inaccurate. Some of those factors might be inappropriate. Some of those factors might be irrelevant and just coincidental to whatever it is that they're insuring. And there isn't a good way to regulate that yet because there isn't a consensus on what insurance companies should be allowed to use. There isn't even a consensus on what factors ought to be used and what factors ought not to be used. And we cannot rely on what we already do in the insurance industry because the insurance industry itself is very often prejudicial and discriminatory. Um, there's a phrase that you can look up called redlining that is a good example of that sort of thing. I'll type it in the chat. And you can see how data is used to discriminate against people, in this case for real estate. Right, and as Colin is saying, and also in the original question from Colin, it's saying ChatGPT is no longer stopped at 2021. It's now using Bing searches to search through current events. Although I've used Bing search, and I still use Google. But yeah, it was a condition. I guess now it isn't, and that's to be expected in AI. As these capabilities are constantly going to be changing. It's a fun time for me.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Thank you for the conversation. Thank you for staying back. Thank you for sharing the links. And maybe one of the things for part two could be these new legislations you're talking about or guidelines. Because that is going towards more, it's guidelines, or testing,
Yeah.
because we always want to validate, that the information is authentic, right? But we'll get you some more ideas too. Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you, everyone. I'll do a closing prayer because we are a cultural college, so
Yep.
we are requested trained to model, um, a little bit of cultural practices. And this prayer is a Thanksgiving prayer. Thank you to all the learners. It'll be in plain Cree dialect, and to our presenter for sharing knowledge skills. And I think all learners were sharing knowledge too. So um, we say, Nina Naskomo, Kinanaskomatin, which means I thank the Creator for creating all of you. And the prayer is in Cree now. Notavinan se manto sabahimina, Vichihinan mina, Kanawaimina, Anuj, Kagisiga. Nianan kitavasi misak na pewak na pesasak, iskwesak, ekwa, kakio, kotagak, ay siniwak uta, askihek, kita tamihinan, ay. And in Plains Cree, you're in Muscogees. Um, there are four cremations. We do not say bye when we end the conversation or when we meet someone. We always say exit, which sort of looks like in the English language when you say exit. But what we say, it's a short form from Ekosi Pitama, but in conversation, that's what I'm realizing. When conversational language is different from written, written is more formal. We say exe moistas. What it means is that's it for now till we meet again later. And I hope to receive your slides. I know you put it on your website. If you can send the link to me,
Sure.
then I'll share it with everyone.
Will do.